All right, let's dive into another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at this pretty interesting story about someone's experience with high-dose vitamin D. What happened when they decided to really bump up how much they were taking?
Yeah, sounds like a good one. I'm always interested in hearing these kinds of stories.
Yeah,
Really shows you that you got to be careful with supplementation.
for sure. So this person started taking 5,000 IUs of vitamin D every day. They felt great at first. You can talk about feeling those classic benefits you always hear about with vitamin D. What are those short-term benefits usually like?
Well, vitamin D is really important for mood and for your immune system, right? So people often feel a boost in those areas, especially if they weren't getting enough vitamin D to begin with. But, and this is important, these benefits are usually linked to short-term use.
Interesting. Now, before switching to whole foods and specific supplements, this person was on a multivitamin for years, actually. What do you think about that? Is there a downside to just relying on multivitamins for all your nutrients?
Multivitamins, yeah, they can be a little tricky. They seem like an easy way to cover all your bases. But they don't always do a great job at meeting individual needs. Like you and I, we could have totally different nutrient imbalances. A multivitamin wouldn't really address those specific needs.
So it's like trying to, I don't know, fit everyone with the same size shoe.
Exactly. And on top of that, a lot of multivitamins, they use cheaper forms of nutrients, like cyanocobalamin instead of methylcobalamin. That's a less effective form of vitamin B12. And those cheaper forms, they might not be absorbed as well or used by the body as effectively.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
So this person switched to getting their vitamin A from whole foods.
Hmm.
Milk and liver, specifically. I know liver is a good source, but I wouldn't have thought of milk as being high in vitamin A.
Yeah, you're right. Milk's not really a top source for vitamin A. It sounds like the liver was probably the main source in this case.
Liver's definitely a powerhouse when it comes to vitamin A.
Yeah.
But are there any downsides to, making it your main source?
Well, liver, it's packed with nutrients, but we can't forget that it also can store toxins from the environment. So where you get it from, that's super important. Like going for organic and grass-fed liver if you can. That's really key. And another thing, liver has a lot of copper. That could be an issue if someone has problems with too much copper.
That's a good point. So then things get really interesting when this person decides to crank their vitamin D3 intake up to 10,000 IUs daily.
Yeah.
That's a big jump, especially compared to, the recommended daily amount, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's a pretty big increase. It really brings up this whole issue of dosage. And the risks of taking high doses for a long time even with nutrients that are generally good for you, there's a point where too much can actually backfire.
And that's where things unfortunately start going downhill for this person. They
Mhm.
started experiencing some pretty nasty side effects.
Mhm.
Hypercalcemia symptoms, fatigue, swelling. They lost their appetite, and they might have even lost weight. A lot going on there. What could be the reason for all of that?
Sounds like a lot to deal with, for sure. It does sound like it could be vitamin D toxicity. A lot of people don't realize that it's a real thing.
Vitamin D toxicity, huh? Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's break down these symptoms one by one. First up, hypercalcemia. What's actually happening in the body when someone has that?
Hypercalcemia just means you've got too much calcium in your blood. Could be a direct result of those high doses of vitamin D, since it makes your body absorb more calcium. But it's not just about high calcium levels, it's also about where that calcium ends up.
Okay, I'm listening. What do you mean by that?
Think of it like this, like a busy city with tons of traffic. If you have way too many cars and no traffic management, you get gridlock, right?
I see where you're going with this.
Exactly. Same thing with calcium. If it's not kept dissolved properly, it can actually start hardening in the wrong places, like in your organs or muscles, instead of staying dissolved and flowing where it needs to go.
Doesn't sound good. So what keeps calcium from, causing that gridlock in our bodies?
Well, there are these things called calcium cofactors. They help with that. Things like magnesium, sodium, potassium, vitamin K2. They're like the traffic cops in our city analogy. They make sure the calcium flows smoothly and doesn't clog things up.
So if you're pushing your calcium absorption way up with tons of vitamin D, but you're low on those cofactors.
You could be setting yourself up for problems. And a lot of people, they're already low on magnesium and potassium. So taking high-dose vitamin D makes them even more likely to run out.
Okay, that explains the hypercalcemia.
Yeah.
But what about the fatigue? How does that fit in?
Well, fatigue, it can actually be tied to those same minerals, magnesium and potassium. Magnesium is super important for your muscles and your nervous system to relax. If you're always using it up, your body basically gets stuck in this state of tension, like it can't relax, and that leads to feeling exhausted.
Makes sense. What about potassium? What does it do?
Potassium is key for your muscles to contract properly. If your potassium's low, your muscles can't really get the signal to move, kind of like trying to run a marathon with your shoelaces tied together.
Oh, wow. It's like a chain reaction. What about the swelling? Could that be related to this mineral imbalance too?
Could be. Remember that sodium-potassium imbalance? Well, when potassium levels go down, sodium can kind of take over in your tissues, and sodium, it loves to hold on to water. That's why you get that puffiness.
Okay, so we've covered hypercalcemia, fatigue, and swelling. And what about the loss of appetite? Could that also be a result of this mineral problem?
It's definitely possible. That sodium-potassium imbalance we were talking about, it can trigger your body's stress response. And when you're stressed, you don't always feel like eating.
That's interesting. And lastly, what about the weight loss? Any thoughts on that?
So some of it was probably just water loss. When you fix that potassium imbalance, it helps flush out extra sodium and water. But vitamin D itself could have played a role too.
Really? How so?
Vitamin D can actually slow down your metabolism because of how it affects calcium absorption. The more calcium you have, the slower your metabolism tends to run. It's because calcium can kind of mess with how your thyroid hormones work, and those are the hormones that control your metabolism.
So taking such high doses of vitamin D, this person might have accidentally slowed their metabolism down.
It's definitely something to consider.
Hmm.
It just shows that even nutrients that are supposed to be good for you can have weird effects when you take too much.
Speaking of unexpected effects, this person was also worried about interactions between vitamin A and D. Is that a valid concern?
Oh, absolutely. Vitamin A and D, they have a pretty complicated relationship, actually. They can work together sometimes, and sometimes they compete with each other. It all depends.
Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in low doses, vitamin A and D actually help each other out. But when you start taking massive amounts of D, it can actually push vitamin A out of where it's stored in the liver.
So it's like they're fighting for space in the liver.
Kinda, yeah. And when that happens, it can affect things that need vitamin A to work properly, like your eyesight and your immune system.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It really highlights how important it is to think about how nutrients work together instead of just focusing on one vitamin at a time.
Exactly. The body's a complicated system.
Yeah.
You change one thing without understanding how it affects everything else, you might end up messing things up.
Well, this person definitely felt let down by the supplement industry after this whole experience. Can you blame them?
Not at all. It's easy to get sucked into the hype about certain supplements, especially when they're advertised as, miracle cures. This story is a good reminder that we need to be smarter about nutrition.
So let's talk about how to do vitamin D supplementation the right way, safely and effectively. What are your top tips for people thinking about adding vitamin D to their routine?
First thing, I'd say check for any mineral deficiencies, especially magnesium and potassium. Fixing those can often actually improve your vitamin D levels without needing to supplement a ton.
That's a great point. It's like setting the foundation before you build a house.
Right. And then if you're still looking to boost your vitamin D, go for natural sources first if you can.
Like getting some sunshine,
Yeah,
just like nature intended.
you got it. Sunlight, it's the most natural way to get vitamin D, and it's all around us. Even just like 15-20 minutes of midday sun on your arms and legs can make a big difference.
What about people who live where it's not sunny very often, or if they can't get outside much? What are some good food sources?
Fatty fish, things like salmon, mackerel, sardines, those are great for vitamin D. And if you can handle it, cod liver oil is another really good one.
What makes cod liver oil so special?
Well, it's got both vitamin D and vitamin A in a form that your body can easily absorb and use. It's a real nutritional powerhouse.
I'm curious about something. We talked about how high doses of vitamin D can mess with vitamin A in the liver. Wouldn't that be a concern with cod liver oil, since it has both?
That's a good question. While it's true that too much vitamin D can push out vitamin A, the amounts you find naturally in cod liver oil are usually pretty balanced. It's not the same risk as going crazy with supplements.
So, as always, it's all about balance and context.
Exactly. Nature's pretty good at giving us nutrients in a way that works well together.
If someone does decide to take a vitamin D supplement, what should they look for? Or maybe avoid?
Look for a good quality supplement with vitamin D3. That's the kind our bodies make naturally. And always start with a lower dose and go up slowly if you need to. Pay attention to how you feel as you go.
That makes sense. Listen to your body and figure out the right dose for you.
Exactly. And if you're ever not sure, talk to a doctor or a healthcare provider who knows their stuff. They can help you figure out the best plan for your situation.
This whole conversation has been eye-opening, really. I feel like I've learned a lot about vitamin D beyond just, the sunshine vitamin thing.
Glad to hear it. It's been great talking about all this with you. It's really kind of fascinating how this story shows us just how connected everything is in our bodies.
Totally. It's like a wake-up call that you can't just mess with one nutrient and think it won't affect anything else.
Exactly. Everything's linked. And when we mess up that balance, that careful balance, well, it can cause all sorts of problems throughout your whole body.
And those problems, like we've seen, they can sometimes be pretty surprising,
Mm.
and not in a good way.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's why I always say it's so important to think about your health holistically, look at the whole picture.
So what does that actually look like? I mean, how can someone really embrace that holistic mindset when it comes to their health?
Well, it starts with understanding that our bodies, they're not static, right? They're these dynamic systems constantly changing and reacting to everything we do, everything we put into them.
Right. It's not like a simple math problem where you add one vitamin and get a predictable result on the other side.
Yeah. Nope, not at all. We have to consider how different nutrients interact. Our lifestyle, even our mindset plays a role.
It's about seeing the big picture, understanding that everything is connected.
That's it. And this isn't just about supplements, it's about how we approach our whole health and well-being.
For sure. It's about making choices that help our bodies work the way they're supposed to. Promote balance instead of trying to force things to happen.
Absolutely. And a lot of times that means moving away from that quick fix mentality and thinking more long-term about what's sustainable.
Which, as we saw in this story, can be tough when we're constantly bombarded with ads promising instant results and miracle cures.
Oh yeah, those promises are tempting, but real health, it's a journey, not a destination.
And that journey requires patience, being aware of what's going on in your own body, and being willing to listen to what it's telling you.
I couldn't agree more. It's about tuning into those subtle cues and understanding what our bodies actually need, not just relying on, what everyone else is saying.
This has been a really insightful conversation for me, I gotta say.
I'm glad to hear that. I think this deep dive has really highlighted how important it is to question what we think we know and to look for information that helps us make good decisions about our health, information that empowers us.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even with something like vitamin D, which seems pretty straightforward, there's always more to learn and understand.
Exactly. There's always another layer, a deeper, more nuanced way of looking at things.
Well, we've definitely uncovered some of those layers today. What are some key things you think listeners should keep in mind about vitamin D and just supplementation in general?
I think the big takeaway here is that we got to move past those oversimplified ideas and really grapple with the complexity of these topics.
That's so important. Recognizing that our bodies are these intricate, amazing systems and that there's no magic bullet, no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to health.
Right. And that means asking questions, challenging what we think is true, and looking for information that really speaks to our own individual needs and what we believe in.
And it also means being open to changing our approach as we learn and grow.
Right. Definitely. That's the beauty of health and wellness. It's a continuous journey of discovery.
It's all about constantly learning and making choices that fit our changing needs.
Well said. And a big part of that is realizing that sometimes less is actually more.
Especially with supplements.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
about finding that balance, that sweet spot where you're giving your body what it needs without messing with its natural processes.
And that sweet spot can be totally different for each person.
Absolutely. That's why having personalized guidance is so valuable.
Yeah, whether it's from a doctor you trust or someone who really knows their stuff, or even a good book or article, something well-researched.
The important thing is to have those resources, the things that help us make smart choices about our health.
And to remember that, in the end, we're the experts on our own bodies.
Beautifully put. It's about getting back in touch with that inner wisdom, trusting our gut feelings.
This conversation has been really enriching, truly. We've really dug deep and uncovered some really important insights about vitamin D and how interconnected our health really is.
I've really enjoyed it too. It's been a great discussion.
Before we wrap up our deep dive, I wanted to get your take on something that comes up a lot when people talk about vitamin D supplements.
I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
Well, we talked about the risks of taking high doses and how important it is to address mineral deficiencies first.
Right.
But what about people who are actually deficient in vitamin D? How can they get their levels back up safely without running into the problems we talked about today?
That's a great question, and one that deserves a careful, nuanced answer.
Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive. All right, welcome back to our deep dive on vitamin D. Before that, before we took a little break, we were talking about how to deal with a real vitamin D deficiency, safely and not get into trouble with megadosing and all that.
Right. Yeah. Super important question, and I'm glad we're getting into it.
So for people who are actually low on vitamin D, what would be a good way to bring those levels up?
Well, like we talked about before, I always say start with the basics. Making sure you're not low on any important minerals, especially magnesium and potassium. That's often a great place to begin.
Because those minerals, they're really important for how our bodies handle calcium, right?
Mhm.
And vitamin D affects calcium too, so it's all connected.
Exactly. Sometimes just fixing those mineral imbalances can actually help your vitamin D levels get better without even taking extra vitamin D.
That's amazing. So it's not always about adding more vitamin D. It's about helping your body use what it already has more effectively.
That's the idea. Work with your body, not against it.
Okay, so once you've got those basics covered, what about actually taking a vitamin D supplement?
If someone still needs a boost after sorting out their minerals, I'd say go for natural sources of vitamin D first, whenever you can.
Like getting some good old-fashioned sunshine. That's what it's there for, right?
You got it. Sunlight, it's the most natural way to get vitamin D, and it's free. Even 15-20 minutes in the middle of the day with your arms and legs exposed can make a big difference.
And for folks who live in places that don't get a lot of sun or maybe they can't get outside much, what are some good foods to eat?
Fatty fish, like salmon, mackerel, sardines, those are all packed with vitamin D. And if you don't mind the taste, cod liver oil is another really good source.
What's so special about cod liver oil?
It's got both vitamin D and vitamin A, and in a form that your body can easily use. It's like a nutritional 2-for-1.
Earlier we were talking about how too much vitamin D can cause problems with vitamin A in the liver.
Yeah.
Would that be a concern with cod liver oil since it has both?
Good question. Yeah, too much vitamin D can interfere with vitamin A, but the amounts you find in natural sources like cod liver oil are usually well balanced. You don't have to worry about the same risks as megadosing with supplements.
So it all comes back to balance and context, doesn't it?
It always does. Nature's pretty smart about how it packages nutrients together.
What if someone does decide to go with a vitamin D supplement? Any tips on what to look for or what to avoid?
I'd say choose a high-quality D3 supplement. That's the kind our bodies make naturally. And don't go crazy with the dosage right away. Start low and gradually increase it if you need to, and just pay attention to how you're feeling as you go.
Makes sense. Listen to your body and figure out what works best for you.
Exactly. And if you're ever unsure, talk to a healthcare practitioner, someone who really knows their stuff. They can help you make the right decision for your situation.
This whole conversation has been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
I feel like we've gone beyond that simple sunshine vitamin idea and learned a lot about how vitamin D really works.
I'm happy to hear that. It's been great chatting with you about all this.
So as we wrap up our vitamin D deep dive, what are some key things you hope listeners will take away from this?
I think the most important thing to remember is that our bodies are incredibly complex and intelligent systems. They have this innate wisdom, and we can tap into that by listening to our intuition, paying attention to how we feel, and making choices that support our well-being.
It's about taking an active role in our own health journey, right? Not just passively following whatever we're told.
Exactly. We have the power to be more informed and empowered in our approach to health. That means questioning things, finding reliable information, and finding practitioners who get it, who understand that everything in our health is connected.
And it means being open to changing our minds as we learn and grow.
Absolutely. The journey of health and wellness is all about continuous discovery.
It's about finding that balance, that place where we feel vibrant, energized, and truly alive.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that inspiring note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of vitamin D. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to think critically about your health, to prioritize balance and what works for you individually, and to always keep learning and exploring. Until next time, stay curious.